Assalamu alaikum and peace be with you. Malcolm X once said, history is a people's memory, and without a memory, man is demoted to the lower animals. In that light, we are recording what we hope will be a series of events that record the founding of the Muslim community in the San Francisco Bay Area and beyond. My name is Javed Mohammed, and I am the host of today's program. All the participants who are in the program today are active members of the community, and this program is being recorded on Saturday, February 6th, 2021, with about 10, 11 months into the COVID pandemic and the resulting lockdown. So without further ado, let's get started. Bismillah ar-Rahman ar-Rahim. I begin in the name of God, the compassionate, the merciful. So thank you all for being on this panel today. And I just want to kind of start off with a broad question. What does community mean to you? And what are your earliest memories of joining it? Zareena, Anwar, you want to take that on?
Sure. So community is like the people that you surround yourself with. It doesn't necessarily have to be from the same religion or ethnicity. And I mean, it's funny because for me, it was joining the masjids in Sacramento. I grew up in Sacramento. And our masjid was super active, and we were sort of the first Muslims there. So that was like my first memory, and it was of all of the people that have been here for like 25 plus years.
Zaki?
Yeah, well, I think just piggybacking off what was just said, community, yeah, it's people who, you can turn to, who share a common set of cultural touchstones and frames of reference that when you have need for assistance, that they have an intrinsic understanding. So that can apply whether we're talking about a work community, a friend community, or of course a religious community as well. When I was a teenager growing up in Chicago, I was part of a group called the YMMA, Young Men's Muslim Association, which was a youth group, and that's one of my clearest early memories of sort of having a Muslim community that was people my own age and with my own interests and with my own experiences, who I could turn to, dealing with sort of the uniqueness of being a Muslim teenager in America. And so ever since then, that's something, having moved away from Chicago a while ago, that's something now as a parent myself, that's something my wife and I have really tried hard to have, is just, being part of, whether it's our local masajid, or, my kids are part of the Muslim Boy Scout troop out of their local mosque, and just having that sense of people just like them who they can relate to.
Okay. Spojmie?
Yeah, absolutely. Assalamu alaikum, everyone. So I think for me, the sense of community is similar ideology, similar culture, similar service to the community. Community can be defined at a higher level as a Muslim American, and then as subcultural, and then as a professional in whatever field that you may be in. Those communities serve a different purpose, a purpose of uniting to further the cause that you're passionate about. I think we all, as individuals, belong to so many different communities, and overall, the theme of those communities is the interest and the commonalities that you share with them, that you want to forward and be comfortable in that environment. For me, I think the earliest memory of a community is, we'll talk about that later, but I think when I came to the US as a refugee from Afghanistan at a very young age, I came here without my mother. So I think for me, a sense of community was being taken to, I grew up in Concord, which was predominantly Caucasian, not many Afghans. I think for me, a sense of community was meeting other Muslims and seeing the particularly the mothers and how they embraced my siblings and I.
Okay, thank you for sharing that. Mariah Jamal?
Well, for me, as a kid growing up in the 70s, community was like, the people of your culture, same religious background. It was just a time when we were kind of in our own little enclave, and we wanted to, you know, we met only with Pakistanis and and other Muslims, mainly Pakistanis though. And so as a kid growing up, yeah, it was going to the masjid and being exposed to that as a community. And then also, you know, meeting with family friends, you know, in the evenings, like Friday night, I remember we would go to like an auntie and uncle's house, and it's like a potluck or it was dinner. And then after they would like put on an Indian movie or something like that. So it was just like stuff like very, very just almost basic necessities just to cling on to your culture. And then as I grew up older, and you know, you have other communities, you do have your school, you have your friends, and then you get married and you get, you know, you have your children, and then there's their communities that become part of your community. And then you find yourself more, you know, even before that with college, that's your community. So there's just so many different layers, and it means so much as just basically as a sense of belonging. And you can belong to a bunch of different communities. But for me, growing up in the beginning, it was basically my own religious background, my own culture. And from them, it just stems and becomes greater and more, you feel like you belong to a lot more different communities than just the one you started with.
Okay, thank you. Asma Ozgan?
Yeah, assalamu alaikum. I'm a bit different because I'm younger than most of you here, so I don't have, you know, much of the experience that I'm in my second year of college. So my parents were moved to America from Turkey, and so I'm the second generation here. I grew up in the Bay Area. So for me, community is, well, I grew up in the Bay Area, so I grew up with the MCA, and I attended their events, and you know, most of my friend groups were from the MCA too. So for me, community is really, you know, and I agree with Sister Spojmie, who said that, you know, community can have many different, you know, definitions, but the Muslim community in particular for me is, you know, us Muslim brothers and sisters coming together in, you know, in America to kind of create a place where we can carry out the interests of our deen and carry out, you know, the interests of our religion. So it's really the ummah, the Muslim, you know, coming together where here in America, a lot of, you know, the values, the Western values don't really align with ours. So it's really coming together and creating a safe place to create, to, sorry, I can't speak today.
That's okay, no worries.
Yeah, to carry out our interests, basically.
Okay, cool. Tooba Ahmed?
So I agree with everything that's been said so far, and I just wanted to add to that we've really moved away from the traditional definition of a community, where that was being born into a community or where you were living, and now it means choosing or forming your own communities and being able to express our identities through them. So to me, communities is no longer about geography. It's more about a sense of identity, a feeling of belonging, and a set of relationships that you have. I believe communities exist to meet the common goals or needs of a group of people. So like Isma just said, to carry out our deen and to practice and carry on our culture and our heritage, that's a community that I feel in the Bay Area we've really embraced. So members of that community, whether it's, you know, a masjid or, you know, your Girl Scouts or Mothers Group or Football League, or, you know, even online gaming communities, or, you know, really niche virtual Harry Potter knitting fan groups. There's just a sense of belonging and a trust and safety and care for one another. So to me, that's a community.
Okay, thank you. I want to kind of just advance the conversation a little bit and just do a little compare and contrast about how things were and how things are now. So for example, like in my case, I moved here to the Bay Area like in the mid to late 80s. And so I think the Muslim community has been pretty good, but no matter which part of the world you go in taking care of making a place of worship, a masjid, and also trying to get halal food. And I remember one time I was with my family in Gilroy, which is about like 80 miles from San Francisco, and we were just having that craving for some nice halal Pakistani food. So we drove there weren't that many halal restaurants. So we drove all the way up to San Francisco just to get that, urge satisfied. What are some of your earliest memories, and how do you think that, not just you talked about being a minority and some of those things, but just how have things advanced from when you joined, or some of you obviously are born here also, to where things are now? Zareena?
That's so funny that you mentioned that, because I think for me it wasn't like food per se, but it was more like, I think back then it was more conservative. Like it was like you have to kind of stick to who you know. You don't like steer away, even if they're Muslim, they have to be Pakistani, and like we have to know them. And if you hang out, like just growing up for me, and maybe I came from a little bit more conservative household, like it was like if we don't know your friends, you can't hang out with them. Whereas I feel like now where we are with like my cousins who are here, like it honestly doesn't matter. Like we don't need there doesn't need to be like a sense of approval before you kind of get to know this person or a certain community or go to a school dance. Like it's not what it was, I think, before. And I think there's been a huge kind of shift in the mentality of that, which I think is good, because I think growing up that was one of the challenges, right, where it was like, well, yeah, mom, you don't know this person, but I know this person, and they invited me over their house, and it was kind of to get that ball rolling. But now I see like it's a huge kind of shift that it doesn't, I mean, even going like out for college during like, those times was difficult, because it was like, oh, you can't, sorry, I just saw the cutest bird on your but yeah, like I think for me it's like mostly the mentality of like a bit, I feel like it was a bit conservative before, whereas now it's a lot more open.
Okay. Maria?
Well, piggybacking off of what Zareena's just said, and I kind of can attest to that. Growing up here, I'm first generation. I was born and raised here. My parents are, they're from Pakistan. They came here in the 60s. And for me, I was, I still was in that bubble. So they kept me in that bubble, although my father is now, he's retired, but he was a middle school teacher. And so he would see like all the bad things that would happen at school and what was going on, and boyfriends, girlfriends, all this kind of stuff. And, it was bad in those days and considered bad. And, it's just being able to, I see the shift. I see the shift with my children in terms of, I was literally not, I mean, my parents were not telling, I wasn't able to even go to the UCs. Like I couldn't go to UCLA, I got into UCLA, couldn't go there because no, we don't want you to stay on campus. Somebody's daughter went to USC and, all this bad stuff happened and she got into drugs and she got into alcohol. And I was like, but I'm not like that. I'm not going to do that. And they go, we know you're good, but we don't know what outside influences are. So a lot of protective behavior. And now with my own kids, I'm like, please go off to college. You need to grow up. You need to understand the world. It's very important. So a cultural shift does happen in that regard, in terms of it, things change, things just evolve. And you do look to see, I would always think, well, I've grown up and I do have my Pakistani friends, and there's just like a small group of us. And, when I get married and I have my kids, there are going to be so many more Pakistanis and so many more Muslims, and it's going to be so much easier. But no, it's not easier. I think it's more difficult. I look for my kids that, because they're now second generation and they're kind of melting in more to the American pot, and they understand the culture, they love the culture, but it doesn't define them. So I'm always looking for, hey, do you want to, a few weeks ago, my husband was like, hey, let's just show them like a Pakistani drama. No way. That was just not, they were not into it. They're like, this is so sad and so depressing. And what is this? And this is not, this is where we're from. This is what it's like. And I go, no, because our family's different. Every family's different, but it's
Mariah,
fun.
how old are your kids? Sorry to interrupt you.
My oldest is 26. The middle one, he's 22, and my youngest is 18. So I have these, different age groups, and they're, I see that they do hold on to their values and all that, but I see the dilution. And I didn't think I was going to see that. But then I would always see that with like the Asian American kids growing up. They'd be so American. I'm like, wait, but you're Asian, you know, how is that? And I would think that we will get even stronger, but it's even harder to hold on to your religion. It's harder to hold on to your culture as you progress, as your generations go by. And it's a test to just keep yourself strong and keep your kids focused and just at least make sure they know where they're from. And that's why culture is so important, religious culture and, you know, community culture, where your background is from. So, you know, although we have all the desi restaurants we could wish for, and we have everything around us, cultural activities and so forth, it's still, the kids have more different layers to them more, and it does dilute. So that's the challenge I face, I feel, as a mom, that I want to make sure my kids have some sense of their community to keep it as strong as they can, but I am fighting with or trying to melt with another community or several communities. So that's where the dilution, for me, I see.
Can I ask, do you feel like you're turning, are you regressing? I feel like I'm regressing. I was like you, I was like, I'm never going to, the things my mother said, I'm never going to say to my children. And now all of a sudden I'm turning into my mother and saying exactly that.
You know, it's funny because I do talk to my mom about some things, and I've let my kids do more things than I was ever allowed to do. I was more protected. I was more, you know, I come from more of a conservative family in that regard. But I let, and the funny thing is my husband is born and raised in Pakistan, and he's less stringent on things than I am. And I think it's because I grew up here, and it's always been no, 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 you can't go here. These people, we don't know this, this, this. And my husband growing up in Pakistan, like, those were his people. So it's like everything is a little bit more, everything flows. But so we sometimes clash on that in terms of, I'll be like, well, no, I don't want her to go to this person's house or whatnot, and he'll agree with that. But if there's like a school function or whatnot, he was much more like, okay, it's under, you know, there are people watching, they're going to this place on campus, they're going to be back at this time, we're going to go pick up. It was fine for him for that. But for me, I was never allowed to go to anything outside of school except for, you know, from 8 to 3, that was it. And then come home, and that was how it was. And with him, with the kids too, it became a little bit more, you know, you have to, I hate to say it, but you kind of flow with the times, go with the times a little bit. And you try to uphold as much of your values as you can, and you hope that what you've taught your children will transpire into their day-to-day lives. And alhamdulillah, it has. But you know, there are a lot of things out there that I was not allowed to do, which are so simple, and my kids will laugh and say, what, you weren't allowed to go here or there or what? And like the simple thing about going to college, what, you had to stay, you had to go to the Cal State, you know, 20 minutes away, you had to commute, you couldn't go, you know.
Maria, I think you're touching upon a lot of subjects.
Oh,
so we're actually going to follow up on those. All right, then, Zaki?
Yeah, well, I've been enjoying just listening to these answers. You know, I think the diversity of perspectives and experiences is so interesting to me. You know, I think for, you know, my experience as a kid growing up and sort of having to navigate my Americanness and my Muslimness, and those sort of being these two different boxes. And, you know, I would sort of run back and forth between them, tag in here a little bit, tag in there a little bit. That's what you know, that's my experience. And what's been so gratifying, first of all, you know, when I moved to the Bay Area, it was an immediate paradigm shift, even though I moved here very shortly after 9/11. And so there was a whole separate cultural conversation happening. But even then, there was a much more pluralistic approach here in the Bay. And the Muslim community was much more entrenched, which was, like I said, it was an immediate shift for me. But I mean, we're talking what, like 17, 18 years now at this point.
And were you coming from Chicago? Sorry.
From Chicago. Yeah, I grew up in the Chicago suburbs, you know, and over there, it's like, at least at that time, it was like, oh, if you want, you know, halal meat, you got to drive, you know, an hour that way. If you want, you know, halal food, you got to go 45 minutes in that direction. And that's, a lot has changed since then. But that was my framework, you know, coming here. And as soon as I came to the Bay Area, it's like, oh, well, we got like halal Chinese over there, we got halal pizza over there, like everything. It's like, oh my gosh, right? And that's 18 years ago. Things have gotten much more pronounced since then. And so when I sort of plug into my kids' worldview, what I find fascinating is all the ways in which they are given cultural reinforcement that they are not abnormal or odd or off the beaten path. There are Muslims on television. There's Muslim characters, and there's women wearing hijab who are in a Spider-Man movie. And all of this sort of cultural reinforcement is so important because it puts them in a frame of reference. They're able to be like, well, I am both this and this, and I'm not running back and forth between these two boxes. It's just one box. And so that's just a broader overall cultural shift that has occurred. But I think, I think the Bay Area, it almost feels like it sprang from here. At least that feels like my experience from that. So that's been very cool for me.
Okay, thanks. Spojmie?
So I think, having grown up, I grew up in the Bay Area. I grew up in Concord, which was predominantly Caucasian. I think my brother and I were the only people of color more so, and also being Muslim. I don't know what it was in me. Maybe it was the rebel in me, but I always made it a point that everybody knew I was Muslim and I was Afghan. And sometimes that got me into trouble. So I think the shift that I see from being in a place, in a community of predominantly Caucasian, where you were striving to share your cultural, your religious identity with others and have them understand. Keep in mind, I went to school in the mid 1990s. I graduated in '93, so there wasn't that much of focus on Islamophobia or cultural or all of these things that we see today that our children see. But having been blessed, I guess, to have the opportunity to showcase those identities, I think I was grateful for that. That made me who I am today, particularly with my kids. No matter, I have a 20-year-old, a 19-year-old, and a 17-year-old about to graduate. And from early on, I installed that, that identity, that Afghan identity or the Muslim identity, very strong. And now, living in a predominantly Caucasian community in Pleasanton in the East Bay, they see that, that, or at least we try to showcase them the strength that, be who you are, don't hide your identity, and making sure that they stay involved in the community and take pride in who they are. Don't sugarcoat your name and change it to an American name. I gave you a name for a reason. You stay with that name. And I gave you an identity to go with. But I think that the biggest obstacle for me, just like Sister Maria said, is my father. I got into UC Davis, even though it was 45 minutes away, said I couldn't go. My mother was okay with it. So I fought him on and I went. I said, I'm not doing anything wrong Islamically, right? So culturally, I don't care. I ended up going. I think I would say I was the black sheep. But full circle back, my daughter, when she was applying to college 2 years ago, wanted to go to NYU. And I was like, over my dead body. You can go somewhere here. There's great schools here. And then what did she do? She threw at me. Didn't your dad try to not let you go to Davis? Oh man, I should have shared that story with you. So, hold behold, she's at NYU, she's thriving, and she couldn't be in a better place. But I think as parents now, we see the obstacles, particularly, I think the sisters would agree, particularly if you're a female, we've faced a lot more obstacles than our male counterparts growing up here. And I've strived not to do that with my kids. Luckily, my son, who's 18, did not want to go far. So he's going to Irvine, but he's home. So, the idea that one of the things that I strived as a parent when my parents did it is don't differentiate between the male and the female. So I think the kids are blessed to have those opportunities that we didn't have and to be able to be open-minded with them more than our parents were with us. So I think that's the differences that I see.
Tooba, can you go first and then us?
So I think the question was how things have changed. I did grow up in the US. I was born and raised in Australia. I moved here in 2013. So I can't speak much about how the Bay Area has changed. But in Australia, there definitely has been a shift. Growing up, there wasn't much of a big Pakistani community. or a Muslim community. And like Zareena said, all the Pakistanis hung up with the Pakistani people, and all the Afghani people hung up with the Afghani people. There wasn't much mixing or, between the cultures. That's changed now, I think, a lot due to immigration and, just being more diverse. But I think the biggest thing that we've come a long way in is representation. I feel like, especially in the media, just a couple of years ago, I mean, you still see it now, but just a couple of years ago, you would see Muslim as a terrorist or, in a bad light. And I feel like now things are changing slowly, but surely. You now see, hijab models on, branded names, or like at Target, you have like models wearing hijabs. It's a lot easier to access Islamic material to teach our children. Growing up, I didn't have any of that. We just had Islamic school, or my mother taught me the Quran. But now you have YouTube videos, you have Islamic cartoons, you have, Pakistani functions that you can take your kids to, and storybooks you can read them to. So I think we have come a long way, but there's still very much more to do.
Okay, so Asma, you want to answer the question again?
Yeah, so, I'm lucky to have grown up in the Bay Area where there's so much diversity, and I haven't encountered, any Islamophobia or any of the things that were mentioned. And I've always seen representation in the media. And I do agree that there is definitely more representation in the media. And, my family, they get their halal meat from Safeway. So that's, alhamdulillah, I'm lucky to be in the Bay Area. But more so than, the food, like that was mentioned. And I really want to touch upon what Sister Maria said about the dilution that's happening with, the future generations. And and this is also a topic that I want to address in this call, because really I've experienced firsthand my friends, they've gone on to public high schools, and they are no longer able to speak the primary language that their parents speak. And as a result, there is a disconnect with their parents. And due to this, there's, they also stray further away from, their religion as well. And as Sister Maria said, the place we are living in, it is a melting pot. And so, and I know one of the future questions is what advice you'd give to the future generations as well. So I kind of want to address that here, since I'm going to be leaving early. But Sister Spojmie, I love how you imbued your children with the values of, this is your identity. And sorry for my parrot, by the way.
Okay.
But yeah, so this is your identity. And that's how my parents raised me too, they didn't shelter me in any way. They said, this is your identity. You're a Muslim. These are certain values which you should not compromise no matter what. And as long as you maintain those set of values and you never compromise them for anything else, obviously, cultural, there's bound to be cultural differences as, the generations progress. But as long as you maintain those certain religious values that you do not compromise, you're able to maintain your identity. And I think ultimately that's what's really important. That's tying back to why community is important too, right? It helps us maintain our identity in an area where all of my friends, they're, not all of them, but I've seen most of my friends who, unfortunately, they're no longer able to speak their language. And as a result, they're straying further away from, their religion and their values. So I think...
So Asma, I think obviously everything you're touching upon is very important, but let's just talk about this. I don't know if it's a separation or what is the delineation between culture and religion? Because one of the things I get accused of as a parent for my kids is that, oh, you said this is what religion is, but it's really more culture. And in my mind, I was thinking about that, and it's like, I don't know, it's somehow, because they kind of meld into one, it's sometimes hard to separate between them. So how in your mind have your parents raised you, or how do you separate it in your mind?
Yeah, so I mean, American culture and, whatever culture, so for instance, Turkish culture, it's like you said, it's difficult to separate between them. But ultimately there are, you know, religious value, our religion decrees what is right and what is wrong. And okay, so I'll just leave him and I hope he doesn't scream. But for instance, in American culture, you have this thing of, you know, moving out when you're 17 and, you know, this is my life. You know, my parents, you know, my parents can't dictate what I'm, you know, doing. This is my life. And that's, you know, inherently it conflicts with our religious values, which, you know, you have to respect your parents and your parents have to, you know, you have to, there's respect for your parents. And this is sort of embedded, there are certain values which are embedded in American culture, which conflicts with, you know, our religious beliefs. And I think we need to be on the lookout for this. And Brother Javed, how you differentiate between culture and religion, it's important that parents differentiate between that as well. And sorry.
It's good. Just keep going.
Yeah, so, I mean, you know, it's just religion. If we refer back to that, our religion outlines what's right and what's wrong. And if you look at that without mixing culture, then if you look at, you know, what's haram and what's not haram, ultimately, you know, that's, if we go based on that, then, you know.
Can I just tag on there?
Please
and
do.
I totally don't mean to hijack your title here and turn this into a.
I'll mute myself, so.
Okay. We want to have a healthy debate. That's okay. Go ahead.
I feel I used to also feel like Isma a lot, but I think ultimately I've decided what I've come to realize is Islam is a way of life. Unlike other religions, it's not just a set of rules. It is a set of life. It's a rule book for life. It's a lifestyle. So there are obviously we have our prescribed rules that we should follow, but I think a lot of people use that as an excuse to embed their own beliefs and values in and turn that into a cultural issue and use that as a, you know, who turn that into a religious issue when it's not. And I think that's creating a very toxic culture. You mentioned like respecting elders, which I 100% agree with. We should take care of our elders. It is in the Quran, it's in the Hadith, and I completely agree with that. But we also should have our boundaries when elders are being abusive or, you know, creating a toxic environment, where we step back and we say, I respect you, but I do not want to do this, or I do not agree with this. And it's okay. That disagreement is okay. I don't have to blindly follow everything you're saying. I think it's the same with, you know, like halal and haram. I mean, we have our prescribed, like, this is halal, this is haram, but within that, there's so many different schools of thought. And if you just, the Bay Area Foodies group, even if you just go through there, you have so many people debating these issues. It just turns into something that it shouldn't. Islam is meant to be easy. It's meant to be a way of life, but it shouldn't become creating conflict or or toxicity. So I feel like a lot of people, it's hard to differentiate, but it is an important distinction because a lot of people use that as an excuse to enforce their own beliefs and then their own values and, you know, make that religious, and even though it's not, and, you know, that's where the harm can occur.
Yeah, and I agree with you, and I didn't want to come off as, I 100% agree with you that Islam is a lifestyle and it's not just, you know, a set of rules. But I think what I meant to say by that was that there are certain, you know, values which you shouldn't stray from. So like I said previously, because that's where, when you start thinking, you know what, maybe this is okay when it's not okay, then that's where, you know, you start to go down that slippery slope and you start lose. So yeah, I agree with you. Yeah.
Well, I 100% agree with that too. And I see that now raising my own children. I see how important that is to have those values in them, even though growing up I may not have, you know, liked them. It's still important. No, and I 100% agree with that, but I still feel like there needs to be a separation of what culture is and what religion is.
Definitely, yeah.
So your parents have driven my kittens nuts. They're banging on the door trying to get in, so I'm trying to mute the sound.
He just wants to get down.
Okay, Spojmie?
They were scratching on the door, and then I let one in, and he came in. So,
Spojmie, you want to talk about culture versus religion?
So again, what was specifically the question?
I mean, I think Mariah, she hit upon a lot of I think, very important issues. And I think I'm kind of paraphrasing here, so Maria, correct me if I'm wrong, but she was talking about some of the shift in values. She talked about some of the generational shift. And then it's just this distinction between culture versus religion. Sometimes we say this is religion and it may be culture. And maybe that was, you know, we live in the West here in America. It's a kind of a more of a secular environment. And for Muslims, somehow those kind of areas can, you know, if you think of it as two circles, it kind of just kind of blends together. So just kind of curious about your thoughts about passing on, you know, how important is culture versus religion, or, you know, just share your thoughts.
So as a parent, obviously, you know, our parents did the same thing, you know, the overzealous, you know, control and making sure the fear that the outside, you know, negative vibes will somehow, you know, ruin their children, and they're coming from another country where they're trying to hold on to that identity. Well, first and foremost, for me, I came as a refugee. I came around age 6 or so to the US. I went to Germany, I came here. I lived with my father because of immigration regulations. I wasn't with my mom for 10 years. So for me, I think I have a different perspective than everybody on the panel, assuming you grew up with both parents. I grew up without my mom, so I didn't really have a parental guidance. And then I grew up, my father was always working as a refugee parent who was trying to make ends meet. So we were sort of left to fend for ourselves. So I didn't really have that parental, you know, loving, like a motherly instinct to say, you know, don't do this, don't do that. I think it was just somehow, you know, by Allah's will, we just picked it up and knew our values. But then, you know, my father obviously, you know, implemented some of those policies, and we did it as the younger generation because that's what you were told to do. As parents, we know that doesn't fly today. You know, our kids, we from an early on age, we teach them culture, we teach them religion, we teach them to the mosque. You know, take them there, do all that. But at the end of the day, as one of the panelists said, is, you know, you hope that they will take those values and go with it. But I think that the cultural shift that I see as a parent is, we don't get to say, because I said so, you have to do this. It's Islamic, it's religion. These kids are much smarter than you and I will ever be. And enforcing it down their throat just doesn't work the way it used to when our parents did it. I think, Mariah, you said your parents said you couldn't go to UCLA. I see that even now within the Afghan community, particularly young, bright Afghan girls, maybe like 5, 6, 7 years ago. I don't know if the parents still have that hold on it. So I think the shift is that, I mean, the value obviously of how everybody grew up, so their religious values are intertwined with their cultural. And then from just my own personal experience, I always say a lot of times we throw in our cultural restrictions or values and intertwine them with our Islamic values. And I think that won't fly anymore with our kids. And I think in the long run, we would lose them. So the fear is much more now, I think, than it was before, to be able to have frank conversations and say, this is the boundaries of religion and this is the boundaries of culture. And there's no more murking it. You got to be distinctive, otherwise you lose your kid. At least that's what my take is.
Yeah, spot on.
Well, and I also want to say we have technology now, so it's not like, I mean, it's like I can say something. I mean, my children are still young, but like they can just go on Google and be like, actually, this is not what the Hadith says, or this is not, so not, you know, whatever it is. So I mean, I definitely think that changes the dynamic of like us, like as parents saying like, this is what you need to do, or even telling younger, you know, siblings or cousins. So there's that huge dynamic there.
So one of the other things that Maria touched upon was dilution. And I can relate to that well because, you know, like in my case, you know, my parents immigrated from Pakistan to England, and that's where I grew up. And now my kids have grown up here, and I just see, whether it be from a culture or religion standpoint, you know, what was very strong at one time, you know, there's just a slow, you know, in terms of, Asma touched upon it, in terms of like language, in terms of just identity, right? I talked to my sister, and, you know, in England, she thinks she's a British Muslim. It's just like, so, you know, Pakistan has kind of dropped by the wayside. So it's just interesting how there's a shift going on. And I understand, you know, it's just it's just a kind of a process. But Asma, I know you said you have to go, but just talk about a little bit about how, you know, as a, obviously you are doing very well from your own identity and from a faith standpoint, but I talk to people, and in fact, I invited some folks to this panel, and there's a lot of anger and bitterness at our community. And it's like, hey, not just like me, but my generation of, you know, it's like, oh, you guys said this and this, and, you know, well, wait a minute. Well, you know, just like talking about, for example, what is halal food, right? What is not? If you look at the different communities, there's a different understanding of it, right? And for us, for some folks, it's like, it's, you know, it has to be a certain way. And for others, there's a more kind of a liberal understanding. So any advice from I'm not asking you to talk, obviously you're young, you're in college, whereas some of the other folks are parents and they have a different perspective. But just seeing that one, and, you know, any words of wisdom you want to share?
Sorry, my bird was being super loud. Words of wisdom regarding.
Well, just in terms of, you know, in terms of identity. So I'm just saying, it seems like you are very, you know, you seem to have been able to navigate the culture versus religion divide, or if you want to call it that. But I'm just, the point I was just making is there are a lot of people who struggle with that. So any thoughts about that?
You know, struggle with the religion versus culture, or struggle with, you know, maintaining your identity in this community?
All of the above.
Okay, so
and I'm not saying this, these are simplistic, these are complex questions. So it's not like we're gonna have a point of view and this is the answer, but it's just sharing your thoughts.
Yeah, so for me, I think, you know, I think that one of the things that helped me as a student, you know, kind of refrain from, you know, trying to fit in and I mean, trying to fit in, but refraining from getting into trying to fit in and in the process doing stuff that is wrong. So how I refrained from that personally was my hijab. You know, once I have my hijab on, everybody knows when they look at me, they know that, okay, well, you're a Muslim and you have certain values that are different. And it helps me differentiate it, you know, from others. And, you know, it helps them know that, you know, I'm different and I can't, you know, go to parties and I can't drink and I can't do all these things. So, you know, for me, having my hijab was a very, is a very crucial part of what helped me maintain my, you know, identity. So that's just something I want to comment on.
And that just brings up a wider conversation. And again, I just want to kind of open this up because obviously there are many practicing Muslims, including all of you. People, the hijab thing, not everybody chooses to wear hijab. You know, even within my own family, you know, there are people who choose, people are, so the thing is, we have, not only we've got a diversity of people from different backgrounds, but even in terms of how they understand and interpret Islam. So how do we navigate this, Maria?
Go ahead, no, Zareena, go ahead.
Well, I was gonna say, I think if you take
Sorry, I just want to say that I'm not trying to impose my views on anybody.
No.
Of course, I don't think anyone's taking it as that. I think you're sharing your personal experience.
Yes.
But I do want to take, like, if we take a step back, I don't really necessarily think, you know, Brother Javed, as you mentioned, it's about hijab or about not drinking or not, because I think when growing up here is like, let's just all admit it, it's really hard. It's really hard. No matter what, and no matter how much integration you have, and Brother Zaki, I think, mentioned a bit about that. It's like, oh, it's a good mix of both. But I don't think you ever, and I'm gonna be honest, like, I don't think you'll ever achieve a good mix of both, because like, it's just very different. It's hard to achieve. Let me say that. Like, it's hard to achieve. Yeah, exactly. And I think if you take a step back, and Brother Javed, one of the things that has really kind of impacted me growing up here, and like, so my background a bit is I have a master's in counseling, but I chose to choose a technology world, and I didn't practice my counseling. Like, I mean, of course I did it in my master's program, but after that I got married, moved here and went into tech. And I started realizing like, hey, I can, you know, like maybe I can do counseling sessions with some of the youth here. And I'll tell you that it was one of the hardest things, which I still have not accomplished. And it was just like, hey, a youth group where everyone sits down and talk about, you know, we have suicide, we have huge problems within our youth, and also within like our age group. And people don't talk about it. We have depression, people are on anxiety pills. These are really, really big problems. And I think they stem from things, I think, like this, where it's like, you know, if you wear this, you're supposed to act like this. If you do this, you're supposed to act like this. And let's say one person steers away just a little bit. Let's say one person drinks one day they succumb under peer pressure and they drink. Now they're labeled as like bad Muslim. Now you're a bad Muslim. And I think there's a lot of like imams that can talk. It's like, you're not a bad Muslim. That's a bad thing you did. It doesn't make you bad. It makes the thing you did bad. And I think you can get back from that. And like, it's like, you know, you're on a diet. Like, yeah, you had a cheat day and now you need to get back on track and like, let's keep going. And I 100% agree that it's a slippery slope of like, you know, you did it one day. Oh, well, I did it yesterday. It's fine. Like, I wasn't struck down by lightning. Now it's fine. Now it's fine. And you kind of, you know, and you can steer to the negative. But I feel that like, it's so hard growing up here because our cultures mesh. Like, you know, people, it's funny because like, for sure, like, I think as like at 17, 18, the youth here, they move out and do that. But that's also the case for Muslim families right now. A lot of them, like, I think every Muslim family with that age group, majority of them have moved out for college. Like, I'm not seeing anyone sort of, so I'm just saying like, it's not necessarily, you know, it's not what it was before. And there's a lot of hardships that I just think as a community, we do not talk about. And when we talk about them, it's with a sense of like, oh, you're labeled a certain way. If I, like, for example, if we all admit, I'm sure there's stuff that we've done, said, you know, you're not supposed to gossip in Islam. Like, I'm sure there's these things which kind of like people sort of judge you. And I think it just gets worse and worse because we start labeling people, we start judging people end up like kind of repressing and saying, oh, well, I'm not going to hang out with these Muslims because they're going to judge me for who I am. And I know people within the Bay Area who literally have two completely separate identities with like Muslims and with like non-Muslims. And I mean, and those are their words that they've shared with me. So it's definitely, I think, a huge, and I'll say problem, a challenge that we face in our community. And to address it, I think that's even more challenging because even when I try to create groups and like, maybe, of course, maybe it's on me. I didn't try hard enough. Maybe I should have tried harder. Like, for sure, it's, you know, on me. I'm not saying that, but it was like, oh, well, no, if they're homosexual or if they're talking about homosexuality, you need to tell them that that's a sin and you can't do that. And I'm like, yeah, but you need to hear them out. Like, you don't know, they could be societal. Like, homosexuals, I think, are like the top suicides that happen, and correct me if I'm wrong for that, but it's just like, unless we start talking about these things, like, I don't think that you'll get to where you need to go, and you'll have people who will be like, oh, I don't want to come on camera and discuss these certain things. And please mute me at any time, but I just feel very passionately.
No, actually, I think you touched on something very good, Zareena, because one of the folks I invited to the panel, they chose not to come, but I had a private one-on-one conversation with them, and they touched upon the very issues that you just spoke about, and they did not want to appear on camera. So just to add to what Zareena was saying, so, you know, there are some things for being Muslim that are very kind of clear to us. For example, we don't drink alcohol, right? Or we're not supposed to. But with lifting, we are living in an environment with shifting sands, right? The ground under it is changed. So if you asked us 20, 30 years ago, you know, drugs were, generally speaking, illegal. So now we have a situation where marijuana or medical marijuana is legal, right? Is that, again, we don't want to kind of get into the conversation of, is it halal, is it haram? I mean, that's beyond us. But the point I just wanted to make from a conversation standpoint is things are shifting below us, around us. And again, it becomes a challenge of how do we navigate this terrain? And it's none of these questions are, you know, are easy. Tooba?
I think I would respectfully disagree with that. I feel like
Please,
times are changing. course, and we have to be modern with the times and, you know, make sure that religion is relevant to our lives. But I also feel Islam has the very foundations, no matter what age, no matter what time you're in, will stay the same. And these are just the foundations. I'm not talking about the nitpicks of, you know, what is hand slaughtered halal, or, you know, zabi halal, or hijab or no hijab, or, you know, what is modest and what is not. I'm talking about the very, very basics where, you know, what is outlined that this is halal, like you have to pray, you have to keep roza, do charity, you know, believe in Allah, and, you know, help one another, you know, not drink alcohol, not do drugs. So if you have those basic foundation values, no matter what situation you're in, whether you're in a party with peer pressure, or whether, you know, in a workforce where everyone is taking a smoking break, or whether times are changing where drugs are now legal, or you're in a society where drinks, it's, you know, if you have that personal foundation, then that will remain unchanged, nothing will change you. And I think that is what Islam is. Islam is between you and Allah. It's not what other people are doing. If someone else is drinking, then that's between them and their Allah. That's not between you and, you know, them and Allah. So I feel like that's, again, what Zareena is saying. I think now we have a very judgmental society, and there's a lot of stigma and shame attached to a lot of actions. And it's not uniquely American. It's not uniquely Western. Back home in Pakistan, a lot of these behaviors are happening, but they're happening behind closed doors or in secret, which makes it worse. I feel like if we're open about it, we can talk about it, we can address it. But if they're happening in secret and there's a lot of shame attached to it, that's more damaging. So I agree that times are changing, but I feel like if we carry our foundations through, that would help us through the times, and help us navigate through what's right and wrong.
All right. So I want to kind of advance the conversation. I want to kind of be talking about some of the, and it's good to bring up the issues, because I don't want it to be just kind of a glossing over of rah, how good our community is and everything. So let's talk about, but I do want to delve upon, you know, sometimes it's so easy to focus on all the things that are going wrong. We forget what's going right. So let's just talk a little bit about that. At least in your awareness, and in terms of, since you've been with the community, what do you feel most proud of? It could be at an individual level, or at a larger level. What do you feel? We've got all these things going around us, but here's something that I feel really happy about. Maria?
I think as a community now, we're much more accepting than we were in the past. Like Zareena had said too, a bad behavior doesn't equal a bad person, but back when I was growing up, if you did that, you're labeled as a bad person, regardless. Now I think these future generations, these generations we have now, the younger ones, they understand more. Like my kids will correct me a lot sometimes and say, well, Mom, we don't believe that. We don't think that person is this way or that way. You got to give people a chance. This is just the way the world is. You have to be inclusive. We have to be inclusive. And I think because of what we've had to deal with, especially since 9/11, and then all the things going on, you can talk about the LGBTQ community and all that, how they kind of support us, and then people having to say, well, many scholars, in our community, some of them will say, well, now we, kind of on a way to support that community because we're getting the support from them. And before, this would be taboo. It's like, no, you have to separate yourselves from everybody. We are different. Yes, we're different, but we live in the society. It's a global society. It's a whole different view of the world society we live in. That's basically it. I think we're more accepting of so many different thoughts, ways of thinking, ways of understanding. That I feel that's what's come up now. I know there's still judgmental people, and that will always be. Okay. But we have more acceptance now of everybody else.
Spojmie?
I think for me personally, as as a woman of color, I think that the thing I'm proud of is, to have paved the way for many, that come ahead of me. Having been one of the first few females, going into law school in the early 2000s, early 2000s, our community is either be an engineer or a doctor, and then being labeled by, or my own family saying, law, is nothing, sort of like that. So not having mentors, not having guidance to achieve the goal I wanted, and in not having that support in some ways. What I'm proud of is being able to accomplish so much I have in the time with the help of a lot of people, alhamdulillah, Muslims, non-Muslims, professionals in my field, and being able to be that role model in some small way to help other females who, always call me and say, my parents don't want me to go to, college, or I don't want to go, I want to go to law school. How did you do it? How do you do it? So being that mentor for the community, whether it's Muslims, whether it's African, whether it's Indian, whether it's American, and being able to show them that, if there's will and there's dedication, then alhamdulillah, things are possible, and just keep your path and keep your success, and you will be able to achieve it.
Okay, thank you. Tooba?
I think what I'm most proud of is how we all come together in times of trouble. I think, especially in times like COVID, I've seen the community band together, help out people, those in need, help out small businesses, and just whether it's someone or don't know, everyone is always happy to help out. And I think that is truly the essence of community. And I'm really proud of how we always do that, regardless of time or age or race or culture differences. We always are happy to help out. So I'm very proud of that.
So sorry, I just wanted to chime in one thing. I know that earlier we said, whether you wear a hijab or not, there are a lot of judgmentals and, people make on. And I think as a Muslim American, being there, being an advocate, shows other young Muslims, whether they wear hijab or not, that there are many role models like us that were not existent when I was going through this. So to be able to be there for those who need us, especially those who may not have someone, I think is important within our community.
Yes, I agree.
Thank you. Zareena?
I think it's creativity of what we're experiencing now, going from mothers who are housewives, who are making up songs to wash your hands for COVID, whether it's the thousands of youth that are involved in the masjid and the community and doing it's the sense of community of creativity. It's so many different ways. It's making videos to show our deen. It's so refreshing to see, and it's definitely from when I was younger to now, it's so much more involvement in such different ways. Be it TV, anything, right? Even this, a Zoom call that's recorded, and hopefully people see and kind of get their, mind to think. I think things like this is what makes me most proud.
Okay, well, thank you so much. I think that's all we have time for today. I know, again, each of these conversations and the threads that we discussed is very, very important, and we hope others out there will kind of build on those. I want to thank all our guests. A couple of them had to drop off, Zaki and Asma. And then, of course, we still have Tooba, Maria, Zareena, and Spojmie. Think of this as a message in a bottle, except it'll be online. It's a record, which I hope will be supplemented by other accounts. And I'd like to leave you with a quote from former President Lyndon B. Johnson. He said that future generations are to remember us with gratitude rather than contempt. We must leave them more than miracles of technology. We must leave them a glimpse of the world as it was in the beginning, not just after we got through with it. And one quote from Muhammad Ali says, "We have one life, it soon will be past. What we do for God is all that will last." Thank you for watching and listening. Assalamu alaikum, and peace be with you.